we have a pre-con coming up. So we've got this past Summit pre-con that's expert performance tuning for 2016 and 2017. We keep looking and like nobody's using SQL 2016. And we throw out this pre-con, hey, we're going to do expert performance tuning for 2016 and 2017. And like after announcing it, we had to duck because there was so much money getting thrown at us from people. It was just, shut up and take my money.
Well, I think when after you announced that I wasn't going to be there, I think that's when the money started going.
That's probably what it was. Yeah.
We got so much money from that, I had to stop listening to the song Common People because I felt like a fraud.
Now, is it the William Shatner version that you usually
It's the only
to?
one I can. No, that's the real version to me.
Yeah.
It's like his version of Rocket Man. That's the only one I can listen to.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty good. I had to stop listening to If I Had $1 Million by Bare Naked Lady because I actually had $1 million. Yeah, it's totally not true. But yeah, so we're really excited about that. But curious to see because we're talking about like SP Blitz Query Store, SP Blitz Cache, some of the 2016 and 2017 stuff. Curious to see. We'll have to take a poll of hands or a Slack poll to see how many people are actually using 2016 and 2017. And none of you even responded in the questions. So go to Webinar has a questions thing over there, party people. Get in there and type. It's not for you. And also feel free to get your questions in. There's a couple dozen of you in here today. Looks like a lower turnout today. Everybody, I wonder what it is. October 11th. People just aren't around. Wes Crockett says, I'm back. Glad to be able to join you guys again. Settled into the new job and loving it. Congratulations.
I thought he got fired. I was glad assist.
I don't know that he didn't.
Yeah, right. He could have. Well, he said he settled into the new job, which maybe just means I'm officially lazy again.
He's working at the Dairy Queen. Yeah.
I fixed indexes. Everyone's real happy. I'm going to coast on this for a while. No more big changes.
Yeah. A friend of mine moves from one big production DBA job to the other. He goes in. It takes him about a year to 2 years in order to get everything perfectly working, and then he can coast for a while and then start looking for the new job and then turn around and go, all right, to the last company. Now I'm just going to consult for you because everything's stable and exactly the way I want it. Then after a couple of years, they mess it all up, and he has to go back in again.
And that's why Tara's here today.
That's why Tara's here today. Ta-da! Tara's out in, I forget the name of the canyon or mountains that she's out in California.
Yeah, Deadly Death Fire Bear Mountain.
Fire Ant Hill. Yeah.
Blood Mosquito.
If you're friends with her, you can ask her on Facebook, but she's not like I'm a Facebook anybody. I'm like, hey, come hug me on Facebook, and I'm a creepy hugger guy, but she's smarter. She only is friends with you if she actually knows it. Khalid asks, are you open to any SQL Server questions or certain topics? Absolutely anything. So we'll probably go ahead and get started now. We'll see. Graham Logan. Good. Usually I try not to use last names, but Graham asks good questions. So it's probably
Too late.
Graham says, does Management Studio 17.3's new extended events profiler, does it cause the same performance issues as the old profiler?
I just installed it this morning and I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know.
Yeah, and it's based off of extended events now, so it should have a lower overhead. But just know that when you use extended events, there are fields that you can grab, just like you could with Profiler. There are fields that you can grab that will have a huge overhead. The more of those that you pick, things like execution plans, more overhead you can have.
Or even SQL text is another one that can cause a bunch of overhead. From just sort of messing around with it too. So for some things, there's like the integer field and then the text equivalent of the field, like say for database ID versus database name. And there's even probably less overhead for just filtering on the database ID than filtering on the database name, because database name isn't part of every single action or event. So you have to like add it sometimes and then filter on it. So it gets weird.
True.
I'm actually poking at it now. Just what are you doing?
We should. And I'd heard from somebody on Twitter said, if you just close SSMS, like you close the profiler piece of it, that the trace keeps running, and it was growing a file on his drive. So I don't know if there makes a difference on how you stop the trace or what's up with that.
When you right click on it, you can stop or launch the session. So if you just close the window, I imagine the session keeps running until you right-click and hit stop. Just like with a regular extended event, you have to stop it for it to stop.
Makes sense.
That's
Some people some party. Let's see. Emily says, which is my sister's name, apologies, I'm late. That's all right. We were late getting to your question too. What are the pros and cons of using a SQL audit, so the built-in audit functionality, versus a trigger in order to log what people do? Richie, have you ever had to build anything that logs everything that people do in a database?
No, because it's usually really slow. So I've...
but isn't everything you build really slow, though? I don't know that that's not fair.
Yes, that's only because you touch it and magic happens.
When I do this right here, Richie? What happens if I push?
Don't touch that.
It's always the end user that's the problem. Everything Richie builds is fine until
That's
someone
correct.
has to use it, and then
That's correct.
I'm testing some Richie apps today, and I can testify to that. It's mostly operator error. Eric, have you ever had to do this?
build it, no. Support it, yes. And relativity, the audit table, there were just massive triggers that every time something happened, everything would go and get logged. And there were some really bad column choices in there. There's like an XML column and then like an Envarcar Max version of the XML column. It's just some real goofy stuff, man. So I've had to support it and like deal with queries that hit it, which are just unfortunate. But as far as actually design it, no, thankfully.
Yeah, the thing with auditing, SQL Server's built-in auditing, is it's kind of like a construction kit, really just like a trigger. You can go build things with a construction kit, but it's up to you to build things like reporting. What I usually end up saying is this just because we want to do it, or is this something where legally we're required to do it? Like the auditors are standing out there with a gun to our heads going, you better capture everything that anyone sees. In that case, the third-party appliances are a much better answer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Wes says, let's isolate that quote out of context. Richie said to Brent, only because you touch it, magic happens when you touch it. That should go down in fame. So I was teaching 3 years ago, I was teaching a past Summit pre-con. And we, I get started at the beginning of the day and I'm like, look, just so you know, I understand if you're sitting in those hard seats all day, and you're sitting there for 6 hours, your butt gets hard, and, something about the hard things in your butt and, after 6 hours. And as the words are coming out of my mouth, everyone is turning to me and it's like, I'm like, I'm just going to stop talking. Wes says, I remember, but probably not. I was at a place where, at his last job, he was at a place where he had to learn Progress DB, and he was like, nope, I'm out. That's funny because we had a question on Twitter from somebody this week who said, was asking me and Richie, hey, how much work is it to learn a NoSQL database?
Hold on your butts, big guy.
I can kind of feel you because I was a SQL Server DBA for the longest time, and I had the opportunity to learn Oracle if I wanted to learn it. Like there were a couple of Oracle DBAs in the same shop, and I liked them. They were really cool guys, but I was like, nah, you know what? I'm really kind of good right here. I kind of know what I know here, and I'm kind of fine. It's not that I don't like to love or like to learn. I just didn't want to learn Oracle at that time.
He also doesn't like to love. I
don't like to
very
love.
difficult.
I love to hate.
Yeah, learning and loving off the map.
And I'm not learning to love, and I'm not loving to learn. That's totally not true. I adore learning, and I'm going to be all over Postgres here shortly. Not because I think it's a better database than SQL Server. We're just using it for some of the projects that we have in-house.
But he's looking put up.
I'm
do
looking
you have any hobby horse things that you're learning, or are you all just work focus on learning?
So I love learning about what .coms are doing, just architecturally, what other platforms are out there, where are people storing their data, why do they make those choices, what are the pros and cons of those architectures. Like I could learn about a new database every day for a year, and I would just love doing that. Managing it from day to day and being on call for it, no, I'm not really interested in that. But learning about them, I'm like, oh yeah, this is really cool. The compromises that they make. So you're starting to learn C, right? Or you were dabbling in it? Yeah, look, C++.
You can see from the bookmark that I've even made a little bit of progress.
That's awesome. Not progress to the database, but just progress. See,
Right.
that actually calls to me only because I would love to learn to read MySQL, Postgres, like the source code behind those databases. That to me is a good time.
Nope.
It's all C in and C out. That's all it is.
Nope.
It's main.
The only C I want to see is this C right here. That's it. And no language is C. Nope.
And you want to see a W next to that as well.
But you.
The W is right here.
There we go. Joseph says 101010 in the questions. Thomas says, if I log ship to another SQL Server to test before migrating, can I use those databases on the secondary to set up an availability group before dropping the log shipping, like ship from one place to the other? The thing with log shipping is whenever you start restoring on the other end, if you want to do something with those databases, like test them, you're generally going to break out a log shipping because you're going to want to write to those. You're going to want to do inserts, updates, and deletes. So generally log shipping isn't as useful for migration testing. It's great for migration, just not as great for the testing part.
You can put them in standby and just let some queries fly at them, but they won't be writable.
Mm-hmm. Khalid says, I have one more question, please. Absolutely. Just in the side of your monitor, you're going to see a slot for $20 bills. Just slide it right inside. Oh, your monitor may not have that. Well, if your monitor doesn't have that, you can ask questions for free. Just keep asking them over in the questions tab. JH says, our app team is looking to migrate their app servers up into the Amazon Web Services cloud, and they want to continue. They want the apps up in Amazon, and they want their SQL Server on premises. Is there anything that I should do on the database administrator side? Run for your life. So what would be the problems you guys would expect to see with the apps in the cloud and the SQL Server on premises?
Richie's favorite cloud word, permissions, would be and security would be the first. Those would be the first two things that come to mind.
Yeah, connections. So the app may not be ready to handle drop connections. So talking to the cloud, if you don't have automatic retries in your code, you're going to need that, especially when you're talking to a database and maybe wrapping transactions around things because the connection could drop at any time.
Latency is going to suck pretty bad too. If you have an app that does one row insert, then waits to get it back, another row insert, waits to get it back, that is a recipe for slow latency.
Yeah, and where's the app living? If the app is living in your own kind of co-location facility now, that has got to go through through the internet, jump through all the hoops to get into the cloud, and then the own network in the cloud, and then it's got to go all the way back. So that's why you have a lot of cloud apps. They're in the cloud. They don't have this separation between my network and your network, and we're gonna have it in the cloud, because that whole latency thing is yeah.
I'd be curious to hear more about why you're putting the app up there and keeping the SQL Server database down on premises too, just out of curiosity.
That might even be temporary. Just to see. Get the app up there and then move the database up during another window.
In which case, stuff like log shipping and availability groups may make it easier for you to get that up there faster. I would move
replication.
Khalid says, what's the best practice on who should be the owner of the database? He says it defaults to the person who created it, but what's like a best practice for the database owner?
Usually SA. I've never seen anything terrible happen to a database from a user owning it. They will have, elevated permissions or privileges on it, but, if it's not like with an agent job or something where if the, Windows account gets disabled, the database will shut down. Come out of here.
Mm-hmm. We alert you for it in SP Blitz too, like that a database is owned by an end user, and we've got more details on that link. If any of you haven't run it before, SP Blitz is our totally free health check utility that goes and gives you a quick report, like an Excel spreadsheet type analysis of here are the problems with your SQL Server. DBA. Oh, funny how they spelled their name there. says, in my first job, my first DBA job, I inherited servers set up by a non-DBA. I think that's kind of how it always happens too. We have a mess of over-provisions, permissions, and non-specific accounts. Can you talk a little bit about the accounts that are used for proxy accounts versus credential accounts? How many proxies do normal shops use? Is the command shell proxy credential normally ever needed?
No. Should have read that one first.
No. We don't deal with much with security, but I don't touch proxy accounts at all. Like I've never used a proxy account. I can't think of what I would do is, so here's the problem. If you want to tighten down security permissions, if you want to start taking things away from people, you need to expect that apps are going to break. Things that are currently working today are going to start breaking. So what I would do instead of tightening down on servers that already exist is go build yourself, this is going to sound like a consultant answer, go build yourself the next SQL server. Go build the SQL 2016 or 2017 that you want to move towards with only the permissions needed inside there. And as people start to migrate their applications and test on the new box, it can be really tightened down. And when people say, I want SA permissions on this, or I want to use a different proxy account, or I need passwords to some proxy account, you can start asking why, and that's where the documentation comes from. Until then, you just say, no, you can't have that. That's why they joke that DBA stands for don't bother asking. Aaron says, we're upgrading our SQL Server from 2008 R2 to 2017. Leaps and bounds there. We currently run our ERP app on the same box as SQL Server. If we were to separate those two boxes, can we expect to see a noticeable performance improvement? We typically have 20 concurrent users in the system.
Well, that's a very broad question.
So what would you, when if someone says, I want to find a performance improvement in the server, where do you start?
Memory. Always memory. Memory is like my first thing. It's like,
What'd you say? I forgot.
Jeez.
Well, even Richie cringed on that one, man. That's rough. That's a bad reception of Richie.
Richie joke. Yeah. If you had a limited amount of RAM in the VM or whatever before, and it was all in the same box, and now you're splitting it out, maybe now the app gets more memory. But maybe you're changing the box too. Maybe you're changing how much horsepower is in the box. I would look at what are your primary weight stats today, like what weight types are your biggest ones. And it just so happens, watch our blog for this week. We have a post on how to do a performance check.
You know, another thing that I see sometimes when people say that they have an app running alongside it is that it's not just an app running. People are like terminaling in to use the app on the server. So there's like the overhead of like RDP or whatever other session however else they get in on there to do it. Sometimes the app is like a browser interface. So when you have like 15 people in with IE open, like it's clanking away on stuff. You're like, stop. Get out.
I like to ask the question. What the question is, well, what's your performance problem on the machine right now?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you know what your performance issues are, then you could probably say moving this to a different, or having two different boxes will improve performance.
Or you can say we're going to move this to such a gigantic box that no one will trample on each other and everything will be fine.
Or maybe you don't have any performance issues and it's already super fast, and moving over to another box with a lot of hardware is not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm. A lot of ifs in there.
There's also licensing too. Since SQL Server is licensed by the CPU core, sometimes you can get bang for the buck just by peeling out to lots more cores, taking the apps and putting it somewhere else, and then SQL Server gets its own cores. That may not even affect performance altogether. You might be able to shrink the amount of CPU cores that you have licensed for SQL Server. Aaron follows up with the app is the normal bottleneck, and it tends to be CPU limited. Perfect. In that case, set yourself up other VMs for the app server. Give them as much CPU power as you want, because you don't have to pay SQL Server licensing for those cores. That'll be good.
Yeah, you know, like when I was dealing with relativity stuff, it's very carefully spelled out that you have your SQL servers over here doing stuff, you have your app servers over here, you have worker servers over here that do things. Everything is very separated out. Like some VMs will pull double duty, like with what they do, but they have just one application on them doing it. Like, you know, whether it's, you know, DTI indexing or doing whatever agenty stuff has to be done in the background to make sure files are in the right places. But Really, like it's a good way to look at architecture for an app because it gives you some precedence to say, no, we need to separate these things out into different places.
Perfect. Chris asks, what's the difference between simple recovery model, bulk logged, and full recovery model? And when would I use each one?
Wow. You just want to like start up here and then you travel down.
In the beginning, there was a database.
Yeah. So the thing that's not the difference, well, aside from some circumstances, is what gets logged. A lot of people think that if they use simple recovery, it logs less. Or if I use bulk recovery, it logs less. Really, only when you get minimal logging on insert is that true. And for certain other things like index rebuilds can that be true. But for every other regular transaction, so like every other update, delete, all that other stuff, inserts that aren't minimally logged, the same amount of stuff gets logged. What changes is who's responsible for transaction log backups and also what HADR text can or support or can run on different recovery models. So in simple, it's SQL Server. It will truncate the log and do stuff as it needs to. In bulk and full, that's on you. And bulk, you can log ship. Full, you can log ship. Full, you can do mirroring. Full, you can do AGs. Failover clusters, it doesn't matter a lick. I don't know. What are some other good ones?
Usually it just all comes down to how much data you're willing to lose. That's the big thing I start with.
Oh, when would you use them? Yeah, RPO and RTO. That's business though.
Yeah. Carlos says, well, okay, I guess one other long-running transactions would be the other thing that scares me. If some yo-yo does a begin tran and locks his workstation, goes home for the week after inserting one record. Hello, full hard drive.
Why are you looking at me when you say that, Brent?
It's only my own webcams are right there, so I'm also looking at my.
Oh yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Carlos asks, any tools or suggestions to transfer a bunch of databases from one SQL server to another? No migration, just transfer them. Oh, just like copying. SP database restore. So if you download our first responder kit, Tara wrote this cool stored procedure that just restores all of the database backups in a folder. It just pulls the most recent full, the most recent diff, and all the logs since. So in our first responder kit, look for SP database restore. It works beautifully with Ola Hollingren's maintenance scripts as well. Graham says, do you always recommend running up? I don't always recommend, but when I do, usually involves Dos Equis. Do you recommend always running update statistics after someone drops and creates a temp table? I've noticed performance improvements, but should I always do this? Oh, wow.
Well, if you want to know more, I don't think we'll go into the full thing here, but a fellow named Paul White, who, if you don't know the name by now, should jump off a cliff, has a couple cool articles. One is called Temp Tables and Stored Procedures, and or Temporary Tables and Stored Procedures. Paul is a gentleman, so he spells the whole thing out, not a lazy bones like me. And then there's another one called Temporary Table Caching Explained, or caching, depending on where in the world you are. And those two can give you a thorough and rigorous amount of information about how temp tables and stored procedures, and often real life work too. You should ignore my bonehead posts about ghosts of temporary temp tables where I create them and then stored procedures fail because of them locally. don't.
Yeah, before you read it, just get a cup of coffee. All right. Sit down. Make sure you have a quiet place for a couple hours.
Yeah. Get a cup of coffee, get a divorce, get a cabin in the woods, print this stuff out, go up there,
It's true. It is true. It's
Cabin in
hard.
the woods.
Khalid says, I'm migrating from some old databases from 2008 to 2016. In my databases in 2008, there's some n-text, text, and image fields. I heard these aren't supported in newer versions. Can I just set the compatibility mode back? I think text, n-text, and image are still in 2017, aren't they?
They are deprecated, but they are still in there. So yep. You don't even have to set compatibility back. You just have to deal with crappy old data types.
Yeah. Let's see. Next up, Michael says, I worked with an ERP app where the vendor recommended installing their app on the SQL Server. I refused to do it. And
you were out of support.
Oh. hate it when vendors do that. No one's allowed to give you the little gold star for being a good database administrator.
Nope.
Ben says, do you have an opinion? Odds are yes. Probably not valid, but we have an opinion. Do you have an opinion on VSS Snapshot backups being used for SQL database daily backups? We have app owners and management only wanting to do daily backups. As long as they're okay with losing a day's worth of data, they're actually magical. They're fantastic. Just make sure that you're getting a product that actually integrates with SQL Server. You should see it as a real backup in your backup history. If you don't, then it's doing a dirty crash consistent snapshot, and your database backups may come back corrupt.
Yeah. So like Brent said, as long as everyone's cool with the fact that you can lose, you know, a day's worth of data, going back to when that VSS snap is, then proceed. One thing you're going to want to keep a really close eye on, though, is your error log. Because when legitimate snaps get taken, you're going to see two messages happen for each database. One where I/O is frozen, so that because it quiesces drive activity serially, each data file at a time. And as it quiesces them, it starts taking the snapshot, and then when it's done, it thaws. And so you need to be really careful that there's not a big chunk of time between the freeze and the thaw, because that means that your drive is essentially frozen in time for the entire duration of that. And there have been so many times, you know, me, Tara, even Brent has worked with clients and seen this in the error log, where it's just like data gets frozen for like 30 seconds a minute every time these VSS snaps get taken, either because like it takes so long to quiesce drive activity, or because it takes so long to copy the snapshot somewhere, and it can have a real impact on performance. For you taking it once a day, there's a pretty good chance that even if it does that, it'll be during some maintenance window. It'll be at like midnight when nothing else is going on. But, you know, we've seen people who are taking like 15-minute snaps, and it's stuck for like 5, 10, 20 seconds. You're like, well, you just added like 20 seconds onto every query. No wonder it's slow.
Looks like a big, long blocking chain when you're looking at SPU as active.
So this is how long I've been around, and how scarred I've become. Every time I hear VSS, is visual virtual source safe, and I'm like, no, don't put it in there. It won't come out. It's corrupted. Ah!
That was my first experience with source control, both as a developer and then as a DBA. I built these VB script things to continuously, like every hour, patrol my databases and check them into Visual Source Safe. And I was so proud of myself until I started losing data and corruption, and then I was not quite as proud of myself.
Yeah, I that wasn't my first introduction, but when it was like, oh, we got to back up like all the damn time, right? It's because it's going to get corrupted. That's what it is.
I love how one person, and let's see here, the question is from Graham. He says, looking at premium assurance, 8R2, I see all the licenses need to have PA purchased. And as he's asking the question, as I'm reading the question from him in GoToWebinar, he goes on to Stack Exchange and asks the exact same question. So Graham, now I know what your account is. Graham, you are apparently Thunder Cougar Falcon. And who can't love, that's an awesome name, Thunder Cougar Falcon. How cool is that? That's fantastic.
It's like one of those password generators where it's like 3 random words and then some numbers.
Correct course battery staple.
I bet that's his password too. We should all try it.
Next question in here. Let's see. Joe asks, are you aware of a way to create something like a virtual SQL Server for developers? My developers want to develop against SQL Server, but I don't want to give them a whole full-blown SQL Server. What should I use, like a pre-configured VM?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Richie's looking like he wants to swallow a cat.
I just install developer edition on my machine. That's like when I get a machine, and that's the first thing I do is I install developer. But I'm probably a little bit different than most of your developers because I hang in the middle of development and database land. So I'm like this weird oddball guy. There are ways that you can actually get a VM of that, and if somebody else talks for a minute, I'll look it up.
I would say also, too, this is what does. So Developer Edition, first off, is free. There's no strings around it, totally free. You can install it on their machine. If you don't want to patch it, this is one of the cool things that Microsoft came up with in 2017 was Docker support so that you could spin up a Docker VM as often as you wanted. I actually think it's easier for most Windows shops to just install SQL Server Developer Edition on the developer's machine. But if you're a Linux-friendly shop or a Mac-friendly shop, that's where spinning up a Docker VM can make a difference.
Well, I think you can even go to the Docker whatever store or package manager or whatever and download MS SQL, and it will just be there. So Docker was the thing that I was thinking of, but I haven't jumped into the Docker pool yet. I'm still old school. I run 4D6s with the DX2.
God. Well, so speaking of that,
wait. If you're on any sort of modern-ish version of SQL 2, it actually just came to 2012 SP4, and you don't want to have a full-blown database on the every developer machine. You can use DBCC clone database to have a statistics-only copy of your database available for people to do their development against. Just don't rebuild indexes or update stats because everything will go away. But as long as they don't do anything goofy like that, the DBCC clone database is a pretty cool command. Just stats-only copy of your database. You can do that on 2012 SP4, 2014 SP1. That was where it dropped. 2016 and 2017. So all the good places that you would hopefully be doing your development against, that's available.
And kind of following up related, Thomas says, what's the best way to give devs a comparable database to prod without giving them prod data? This is a really easy way to do it. Just keep in mind it has no data. And if you want any config tables, for example, you may have to script those and include those as well.
Yeah, that's like one of the hardest problems we have as developers is to create a good test data set so that we can actually do things that a prod is eventually going to do. And we don't want prod data. There's no way that I think any sane developer would ever want prod data. And if they do want prod data, it's because they want to make sure that it's running at the same size and breadth and speed as prod would probably get into it. So that's why this getting a stats-only copy would be good. But if I'm actually writing T-SQL and testing it and doing all that, it doesn't help me much because there's no data here.
One quick one. Chris says, I get the following error when running SP Blitz on a 2008 R2 box. I have an arithmetic overflow error. Make sure, first off, just that you're on the latest version of SP Blitz because it's possible that that's an older one. We've fixed several of those bugs. It may also be that the thing has been up for, say, 2-3 years and wait stats have gotten really high. I thought we'd fix that bug, but just in case, I would go look in the wait stats section. Or just try, this is going to be awful to say. I bet Erik has a better answer than me.
I know I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you want to try running it with debug equals 1, you can figure out which step that happens on, and then if you want to and then you can figure out if it's the query that's doing it or if we're doing something wrong. And if we're doing something wrong, you can tell us about it on GitHub. Just make sure you have whatever check ID is running when the arithmetic overflow happens, and we can do a better job investigating.
What if you put debug equals 42?
I think it's a bit, so you'll probably get an arithmetic overflow error there.
Oh.
Sorry. Actually, no, it's a tiny int because you can do debug equals 2 if you want to print out the dynamic SQL that runs as well as the check IDs.
Then JH asks, when we're trying to encrypt all our network connections, what should I look out for? Go hit this website or this post by Aaron Bertrand, SQL Server Support for TLS 1.2. Now, there were about another dozen questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, so don't hang around waiting for us for another week. Head on over to dba.stackexchange.com and you can post questions about SQL Server. We answer all the time. It happens to be a different VM than I work in. I don't work in this one, but if I had my real one up, it would show my reputation and all that kind of thing. But Erik and I sit around all day answering questions on Stack. We're not in here in Webcast.
That's right.
So thanks everybody for hanging out with us this week, and we will see you all next week on Office Hours. Adios.